We drew straws to see who would follow Crawford. I lost. After a short stint clerking in the India office from 1906 to 1908, Keynes left to teach economics back at Cambridge. He returned to government service in the finance section of the Treasury at the start of World War I. There he became a trusted advisor to Prime Minister Asquith, frequently accompanying the Prime Minister and his wife on weekend escapes to their home outside London, where Keynes often partnered Lady Asquith in bridge. This kind of access to power shouldn't be surprising. Keynes had been an Eton scholar, a King's College honors graduate, a Cambridge lecturer, and was to be a Fellow of King's. His father was a Cambridge Don, and his mother was to be Mayor of Cambridge. He had been born and trained to take his place among Britain's governing elite. As an advisor to the Treasury, he accompanied the Liberal Prime Minister Lloyd George to Versailles to help develop plans to settle German reparations and inter-Allied war debts. Keynes was appalled by what transpired, what he saw as the grotesque political log-rolling and defiance of economic logic. He resigned from the Treasury delegation, and in a state of great agitation wrote his masterful polemic, The Economic Consequences of the Peace. He thundered, "The policy of reducing Germany to servitude for a generation, of degrading the lives of millions of human beings, and of depriving a whole nation of happiness should be abhorrent and detestable. Abhorrent and detestable even if it were possible, even if it enriched ourselves, even if it did not sow the decay of the whole civilized life of Europe. Some preach it in the name of justice. In the great events of man's history, in the unwinding of the complex fates of nations, justice is not so simple. And if it were, nations are not authorized by religion or by natural morals to visit on the children of their enemies the misdoings of parents or of rulers. The public blast, this one, together with withering verbal portraits of America's Woodrow Wilson, France's Clemenceau, Italy's Orlando, and Great Britain's Lloyd George, gave Keynes a public persona. It also endeared him to his Bloomsbury friends. Not only had he created a work of art, but he had melded economic expertise, a passion for justice and fairness, and a willingness to set his own views apart from popular wisdom. As Keynes had forecast, the Versailles Treaty led to monetary collapse and massive unemployment in Europe. We in the United States tend to think of the Great Depression as beginning in 1929, but the post-war collapse of Europe was at depression levels. Over the 1920s, Great Britain, for example, had only 1 year with an unemployment rate below 10%. It was in this period that Keynes, the Cambridge Don, policy advisor, and public scold, turned to economic journalism. He began to write most of the economics articles for the Nation and Athenaeum, the unofficial house publication of Britain's Liberal Party. And at the same time, he engaged in frequent bouts of letter writing and controversializing in the Times and Manchester Guardian, as well as in U.S. newspapers like the New York Times and journals of opinion like the New Republic. British leaders, conservative leaders, were campaigning in 1923 and 1924 on a return to the gold standard at pre-war parity, a move that would make British goods significantly more expensive to sell outside Britain. Keynes argued that the effect of this would be to reduce the wages of English workers in export industries in order that those goods could stay competitive in world markets. He judged that wage reductions would hit workers in coal mining and shipbuilding especially hard. This view was theorized in his 1923 book, A Tract on Monetary Reform, a slender volume that emerged from a set of articles that Keynes edited for the Manchester Guardian. There, Keynes argued, "Since I regard the stability of prices, credit, and employment as of paramount importance, and since I feel no confidence that an old-fashioned gold standard will even give us the modicum of stability that it used to give, I reject the policy of restoring the gold standard on pre-war lines." Alas, in 1925, the Conservative government did indeed return Great Britain to gold at the pre-war dollar exchange rate for the pound of $4.86. The general strike of 1926 was the result. Workers refused to accept the slashing of their wages. The Conservative Prime Minister Baldwin and Chancellor of the Exchequer Winston Churchill broke the strike by a series of harsh measures, and most workers had returned to work by 1927. But a number of miners lost jobs permanently and suffered hardships so severe that many mining communities of northern England have not to this day voted for Conservative leaders. The Labour Party emerged stronger from the strike, and post-strike wreckage, Keynes's Liberal Party began to crumble. And inevitably, Keynes penned a new tract titled The Economic Consequences of Mr. Churchill. In 1929, with Labour and Conservative government parties contesting a general election, Keynes urged Liberals to abandon Asquith and throw their support instead to Lloyd George. He co-authored a pamphlet with Hubert Henderson titled Can Lloyd George Do It? There, in 1929, for the first time, Keynes laid out his policy views on combating depression levels of unemployment. Kevin Hoover, in a few minutes, will be talking about how those ideas were theorized in his 1936 magnum opus, A General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money. But by 1929, Keynes is quite clear about what would constitute a correct economic policy for depression. Why, he asked, is it not enough to offer facilities and encouragement to private enterprise? Whether we like it or not, it is a fact that the rate of capital development in the transport system, the public utilities, and the housing of this country largely depends on the policy of the Treasury and the government of the day. It is not a question of choosing between private and public enterprise in these matters. The choice has already been made. In many directions, it is the question of the state putting its hand to the job or of its not being done at all. Roads, reforestation, reclamation and drainage, electrification, slum clearance and town planning, the development of canals, docks, and harbors. These are the things which need to absorb large sums of capital today. And in every case, the initiative necessarily lies with the public authority. But the object is not to develop state enterprise as such. The object is to develop and equip the country through the instrumentality of such forms of organization as already exists and lie ready to our hands. With respect to conservative objections to massive government investment in infrastructure, Keynes wrote, negation, restriction, inactivity, these are the conservative government's watchwords. Under their leadership, we have been forced to button up our waistcoats and compress our lungs. Fears and doubts and hypochondriac precautions are keeping us muffled up indoors. But we are not tottering to our graves. We are healthy children. We need the breath of life. There is nothing to be afraid of. On the contrary, the future holds in store for us far more wealth and economic freedom and possibilities of personal life than the past has ever offered. There is no reason why we should not feel ourselves free to be bold, to be open, to experiment, to take action, to try the possibilities of things. And over against us, standing in the path, there is nothing but a few old gentlemen, tightly buttoned up in their frock coats, who only needed to be treated with a little friendly disrespect and bowled over like ninepins. Quite likely they will enjoy it themselves when once they have got over the shock. The problems that Keynes saw in the 1920s and 30s concerned the financial instability of international capital and trade flows and the instability of governments singly to help create lasting employment. He thus argued for multinational management of the world financial system by organizations staffed with experts. In time, his work at the 1944 Bretton Woods Conference would instantiate his vision by creating the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. Keynes was a tireless advocate of investment as the engine for creating income and employment. His belief that intelligence and will could solve economic problems never wavered. He was confident that expertise could serve humankind. Keynes was no socialist, nor had he any sympathy for the Tories. He was a classical liberal whose advice on economic policy was fully consistent with his views on human affairs. Let me close then with what might stand, as he wrote it, as his credo. The political problem of mankind is to combine three things: economic efficiency, social justice, and individual liberty. Efficiency needs criticism, precaution, and technical knowledge. Social justice needs an unselfish and enthusiastic spirit which loves the ordinary man. Individual liberty needs tolerance, breadth, appreciation of the excellencies of variety, and independence, which prefers above everything to give unhindered opportunity to the exceptional and the aspiring. Now, social justice is the best possession of the great party of the proletariat. But economic efficiency and individual liberty require the qualities of my liberal party, which by its traditions and ancient sympathies has been the home of economic individualism and social liberty.